Hey everybody, if you are having an issue with rigging up these soft plastic lures onto these jig heads, and a lot of times they come out looking like this wherever they're just not straight, they got bumps in them and they just don't look natural. In this video, I'm going to give you some step-by-step instructions on how to make sure that this does not happen anymore. Let's go ahead and get started on this, and before we get too far into it, I do understand that a lot of these rigging videos, they go really fast and it's kind of hard to follow, especially if you're having issues with it and you're missing a step or two. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain each one of these steps and why we're doing it. That way, whenever you're done with it, you can get to the point where every time that you rig these up, they're going to be straight and they're going to be the way that they should be. So first thing that we're going to do is we are going to take the lure, and this is going to be our soft plastic lure. I just so happen to be using a prawn. This is our 3.5-inch shrimp imitation. Now this could work with a paddle tail, could with a jerk shad, basically any of your soft plastics that are unrigged and you've got to put them on a jig head. This happens to be the Haas round eye jig head that we have, so the size of the jig head and the lure need to match up. This is a 2/0 hook. This is a 3.5-inch shrimp imitation, so they're sized up perfectly. If I was using a bigger shrimp, then I would need a bigger hook. So just make sure and keep that in mind. Make sure the hook is the right size for the lure that you're using. And what we want to do is the starting positions. We want to make sure that the back of the lure is facing towards the hook itself. Because what we're going to do is we're going to insert the hook, we're going to twist it, and we want that hook to come out the back of the lure. So make sure we're starting in the right position to begin with. Make sure that it's not facing towards the belly. We want it coming out the back. Now, first important step is going to be making sure if you want this to start out straight, or end up straight, I should say, it should start out straight. So make sure that hook point is going to go right in the center of the head of that lure. If it's offset a little bit, it's going to have some issues, and it's not going to be straight as it's going. So just take your time, make sure it is going into the center of that lure before you go in. Now, a lot of times when you're seeing people rig up videos, these people have been doing it for years and years and years. So this isn't a speed, this isn't a race. We want to make sure and get it right. So take your time. So after we get this centered in, what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the lure up onto the hook. I'm not pulling the hook, the jig head into the lure. I'm actually pushing the soft plastic lure up on the hook. And this way I have more control of what's going on with the lure. And then I'm just going to keep inching it up just a little bit at a time. And what I'm trying to do is I want to make sure that the hook point is going to stay center left to right in the back of that lure. So as I'm pushing it up, I can actually feel where that hook point is. I'm giving a little bit of squeeze, and that way I know I'm going to get that hook point as centered as possible. And when we're going to stop is right about there. Whenever that head of that lure is starting to make that downward turn towards the head, that's when we want to stop. That's it right there. Now this lure happens to be a little bit clear, so I can actually see down in there. But at this point, what you want to do is you want to turn your lure and start looking down the head of it right there. We want to make sure that that hook point and everything is still lined up. And then what we can do is we can actually take your fingers and you can actually feel along where that hook point is inside the lure. If there's any odd bumps or any dents or anything like that, more than likely you're probably off a little bit, and you can pull that hook out and you can start all over again. It's not going to do too much damage. Now at this point, we're ready to take the hook point and put it through the back of the lure. We want to make sure that this is still centered and we're even up left to right. So I'm just going to go ahead and just take the back of this hook point and go right out the back of that lure. And before we go too much further, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look and I'm going to make sure that that hook point is coming out the center of that back. And the reason why we're doing that is this is kind of the point at no return. We want to make sure we get that. If it's not centered, this looks pretty good, but if it's not centered, what you can actually do is just put the hook back into the lure and then start all over again, making sure it is centered. So at this point, you're still good. You can make your adjustments. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and push this up, but we're not going to push it all the way up. At this point, this is where most people are going to take this lure and just push it all the way up to the head of the jig head. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you something that's going to save you some money and it's going to save you some lures and some headache. And that's called the 90-degree load. See, what happens is those little barbs that you see on the jig head, those are designed to tear into that plastic to hold it in place. But if I was just to push it straight up onto that jig head just the way that it is, well, it's going to rip a channel inside the plastic, both of these barbs right there. And what that does is it really kind of, it gives you a soft part of that plastic it's not going to hold up to. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the head of that lure and we're going to twist it 90 degrees just like that. So you see the jig head is facing this direction and my head of my lure is 90 degrees from it. What we're going to do is we're going to push it up right onto that jig head. And what's happening is the barbs on the jig head is actually tearing the plastics on the side. So we got a groove that's right here, and then we've got a groove that's right here. So what we're going to do at this point is we're actually going to rotate that jig head into place. So now those barbs are attached into some plastic that's never been torn before, and it's going to stay in place a lot better. And this is what your lure should look like whenever you're done with it. It's going to be nice and straight. It's not going to have any dents or anything that's going to cause it to not swim right. So if you follow these instructions, you're going to get this each and every time that you rig up these soft plastics. Now, one thing, this is a shrimp imitation, but the same thing can actually work on a paddle tail lure, and you can work on a jerkbait. But any of these soft plastics that you see, you can pretty much rig it up the same way, and you're going to get it right each and every time. And if you have any questions whatsoever when it comes to rigging, whether that be artificial lures or live bait, we probably have the answer for you at saltstrong.com. And if you like the free stuff that you're seeing here, you should see what our insiders get. And for more information on how to get a special offer to join the Insider Club, to have all of this information available to you, I'm going to put the link in the description down below.